You didn't lose her because you weren't good looking, successful, or worth choosing. You lost her because you walked straight into a set of traps you never realized you were creating. Behaviors that quietly push women away without confrontation, without an argument, without a dramatic ending, just distance. And here's the part most men never see coming. She picks up on these mistakes long before you even feel something is off. To her, they're early signals of pressure, emotional risk, or instability, while you're still convinced everything is moving in the right direction. If you've ever felt blindsided by a woman suddenly growing cold, drifting, or acting differently overnight, this is where it begins. Today, I'm walking you through the early patterns that slowly kill attraction and the adjustments every man needs to make before he loses another woman who actually mattered. Pay attention. Sometimes one small shift is all it takes to save something that could have become amazing. The first mistake is confessing too much too soon or showing neediness before a foundation even exists. A lot of men believe opening up quickly, expressing feelings early, or declaring interest right away shows courage or romantic intention. But to a woman, especially a woman who's seen emotional chaos, rushed attachments, or men who latch on too fast, it communicates something completely different. When a man barely knows her and already expresses heavy emotions, she doesn't interpret it as sincerity. She interprets it as urgency, as fear, as an attempt to secure something that hasn't even had time to breathe. Women don't trust sudden intensity. They trust consistency. They trust measured interest. They trust attraction that grows, not one that detonates. When your feelings escalate before the bond does, she doesn't see passion. She sees a man with no filter, no standards, and no patience. A man who becomes attached to anyone who gives him a little attention instead of someone who chooses intentionally. Picture this. A man meets a woman and within a few days he's telling her he hasn't connected with anyone like this in years, that she's special, that he can already see a future. In his mind, he thinks he's being bold, but in her mind, he's lowering his value. Because if you fall this hard for her this quickly, the question she quietly asks herself is simple. How many others have you fallen for the same way? She can sense neediness long before you ever verbalize it. She feels it in the pacing, in the pressure, in the eagerness to define something she hasn't even had time to emotionally experience. The moment you rush, you hand her all the power while removing your own. When she feels that imbalance, she stops seeing you as a man with options and starts seeing you as a man desperate for approval. And desperation is never attractive, not because she dislikes you, but because it amplifies her fear of being responsible for your emotional state. When you move too fast, you don't calm her nerves, you activate them. You make her imagine a relationship where she feels smothered, overburdened, or unable to breathe. A relationship where she's expected to fill the gaps you were supposed to handle on your own. If you want her to trust you, trust the pace. Let the connection mature instead of trying to force results. Let curiosity build instead of suffocating it. A strong man moves with intention, not urgency. He allows interest to unfold naturally. Slow is powerful. Steady is attractive. Measured is irresistible. That's how you keep your dignity and how you keep her interest growing instead of collapsing. The second mistake is possessiveness and the urge to control something that was never yours to control in the first place. Control never feels like affection to a woman. It feels like a warning sign. The moment she senses a man trying to influence her choices, her social life, or her independence, the door inside her begins to close. Not because she doesn't like him, but because women learn very early that losing their independence is the first step toward losing themselves. Men often mistake constant check-ins, frequent questions, and excessive monitoring as signs of attentiveness. But to her, it communicates fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being replaced, fear that you don't believe you're enough. When a man constantly asks where she is, who she's with, or why she didn't respond quickly, he reveals insecurity, not care. Imagine a woman initially excited about a man, laughing with him, feeling the chemistry, enjoying each moment. But within a short time, he begins texting nonstop, obsessively watching her online status, questioning her choices, or wanting constant access to her attention. What started as attraction now feels like confinement. She begins to breathe differently around him. She begins to overthink. She begins to imagine what the future would look like with someone who needs this much reassurance. And eventually, she steps away, not out of disinterest, but out of self-preservation. Possessiveness isn't about her actions, it's about your fears. Fear that she might meet someone better, fear that she might drift away, fear that you won't be able to keep her unless you control the environment. But here's the tragic irony. The more you try to control her, the quicker you drive her out of your life. The tighter you grip, the faster she slips away. Women are drawn to men who trust themselves, men who don't rely on someone else's behavior to feel secure, men who give space without disappearing. When a woman feels trusted, she softens into the connection. When she feels watched, she escapes it. If you want loyalty, stop gripping and start growing. Build confidence, build boundaries, build a life stable enough that her freedom doesn't threaten you, because a man who believes in his own worth never needs to restrict a woman's. And that's exactly the type of man she chooses without hesitation. But even when you handle freedom correctly, many men stumble into another trap without realizing it. They bring their past into a space that was supposed to feel fresh, clean, and untouched. Nothing drains a woman's curiosity faster than hearing too much about someone who came before her. You might think you're being open, mature, or offering context, but to her, every detail you share reshapes the entire atmosphere. It makes her question where she fits, what she's stepping into, and whether you're emotionally prepared for anything new at all. Women don't just listen to what you say, they interpret what it means. If you speak too warmly about an ex, she wonders why that relationship ended if it was so meaningful. If you speak with bitterness, she wonders what story you'll tell about her the day she becomes part of your history. Either way, she starts calculating risk, because the moment you bring up your past too often, she feels like she's competing with a memory she never agreed to battle. Picture this. You're sitting across from a woman who genuinely likes you. The conversation flows, she's engaged, and everything feels light. Then suddenly, you mention how your ex didn't appreciate you, or how she complained constantly, or how she left you shattered. In your mind, you're just sharing life experience. But in her mind, you just pulled another woman into the room and placed her between you. The moment that happens, she shifts from connection to caution. She stops focusing on you and starts thinking about emotional residue, unresolved wounds, and patterns that might repeat. Oversharing doesn't make you look honest, it makes you look unhealed. And comparisons, even the subtle ones, make her feel interchangeable, as though she's stepping into an audition for a role someone else already performed. A grounded man talks about his past with simplicity, with balance, with clarity, just enough to acknowledge it, never enough to let it overshadow what's unfolding now. He doesn't use a new connection to rewrite old chapters, and he doesn't expect a new woman to soothe injuries someone else caused. If you want her to feel secure stepping into your life, stop holding up mirrors that reflect a woman who's no longer there. Leave the past behind you so the present has room to breathe. And that leads naturally into the next mistake, holding back so much that nothing in the connection can grow. Most men hear the word stingy and think it's about money. But for a woman, stinginess shows up long before any bill hits the table. She feels it in your energy, in your effort, in the way you contribute or withhold. Generosity to her has nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with emotional availability. When she senses that you operate from scarcity, scarcity in attention, in participation, in presence, she withdraws, because scarcity inevitably leads to disappointment. This isn't about gifts. This is about whether you share your world or keep everything locked away. Imagine a man who never suggests plans, never initiates conversations, rarely offers support unless directly asked, and only participates when it's convenient. He may think he's easygoing or independent, but she sees something very different. She sees a man who is emotionally absent, self-contained to the point of isolation, and uninterested in building anything that requires effort from both sides. Even something as minor as refusing to share food or insisting everything stay separate sends a silent message. I'm here, but only for myself. And when everything centers around you, nothing can form between you. Women don't want a man who gives endlessly without boundaries. That's not strength, that's depletion. They want a man who gives with intention, who shows through small acts that he has space for someone else in his life. Connection grows from consistent signals that say, "You're welcome here." Stinginess, whether emotional or material, makes a woman feel like she's pouring into a dry container. And once she senses the imbalance, the bond starts to feel like labor instead of partnership. You don't need to be extravagant. You don't need to overextend. You simply need to show that you have room in your time, in your thoughts, in your effort for something beyond yourself. Because a relationship cannot grow when one person is living in a tight, closed off world. Generosity isn't about spending money. It's about opening the door and inviting someone into your experience. Share your presence, share your attention, share enough of yourself that she feels included, not tolerated. A connection needs space for two, not one person standing alone while the other tries to reach in. And then comes another mistake men often overlook: moving toward physical closeness faster than the emotional ground can support. Every woman has an internal alarm system, not because she's dramatic, but because the consequences of choosing wrong can be far more dangerous for her than for you. When you push for intimacy before trust is established, what you interpret as excitement or chemistry, she interprets as a shortcut, a way of bypassing emotional depth, a sign that you're eager for the reward without doing the groundwork. Women don't fear closeness. What they fear is regret. They fear letting the wrong man in. They fear giving access to someone who views intimacy as a trophy rather than a natural progression of trust. When you rush her, she doesn't feel wanted. She feels evaluated. She feels like you're trying to accelerate a connection she hasn't fully stepped into yet. And instead of drawing her closer, that pressure reminds her to protect herself. Because when your desire outruns your character, she senses it instantly. The moment you lean in too aggressively, when your physical urgency pushes ahead of the emotional foundation, the balance between you snaps. Picture this. You've spent a beautiful evening with a woman, genuine conversation, shared laughter, small glances that carry meaning. Everything feels aligned. But instead of letting the moment breathe, instead of allowing that spark to deepen at its own pace, you rush it. You try to escalate beyond what the connection has earned. You treat early chemistry like a guarantee, and in that instant, the atmosphere shifts. What felt warm suddenly feels pressured. What felt natural now feels forced. She steps back not because she's uninterested, but because she feels cornered into a decision she was never ready to make. Women don't fear closeness. They fear being misread. They fear a man who sees their body before he sees their heart. When you push too soon, she doesn't feel chosen. She feels evaluated, as if you're checking boxes instead of building something real. What keeps her drawn to you isn't speed. It's steadiness. It's your ability to read her pace and honor it. Genuine desire grows when it's treated with intention, not urgency. If you want her trust, let her enthusiasm lead the moment. Let the tension unfold naturally instead of treating it like an obstacle you're trying to conquer. Patience isn't passivity, it's power. It tells her your interest comes from depth, not impulse. And the more you respect her timing, the more she'll willingly meet you where you are. But even when men get that right, another mistake quietly erodes the connection, saying one thing, doing another, and expecting her to trust the empty space between. A woman doesn't leave because of one broken promise. She leaves because inconsistency exposes a truth you never voiced. She listens to your words, but she believes your behavior. When your actions wobble, when your promises shift depending on your mood, when you treat reliability as optional, she feels the instability immediately. Women don't demand perfection. They crave predictability, not a rigid routine, but the reassurance that when you say something, it carries weight, that your commitments aren't made casually, that your effort won't evaporate the moment life becomes inconvenient. Imagine this: a man promises he'll call later, and he doesn't. He commits to meeting her, then cancels at the last minute. He claims he's ready for something real, then disappears without explanation. None of these moments seem dramatic on their own, but to her, they accumulate. They form a pattern, and that pattern whispers something she cannot ignore. His words are light. They float. They don't anchor to anything. Consistency creates attraction. Chaos destroys it. When she begins to question your reliability, she immediately imagines what a future with you would look like. If that future feels unstable or draining, she'll step away long before the relationship becomes official. She isn't punishing you, she's preserving her peace. Men often confuse loyalty with tolerance, believing that if a woman cares, she'll endure the inconsistency. But a mature woman doesn't wait around hoping you'll eventually become dependable. She protects her time by walking away early. Reliability isn't just about promises, it reveals who you are at your core. It shows that you have a center, a baseline of steady intention that doesn't disappear when life shifts around you. That baseline is what makes you trustworthy. If you want her respect, don't drown her in empty reassurances. Offer clarity. Show up when you say you will. Follow through even in the small things. Speak less and let your actions say more. A man whose behavior aligns with his words becomes rare, and that rarity is magnetic. Then comes the final mistake, showing up with either too little presence or far too much noise. A woman doesn't just listen to your words, she feels the way you occupy space. Presence is its own language, and it communicates long before you speak. When a man carries himself with calm strength and intention, she notices. But the reverse is just as true. If you shrink, she feels it. If you overwhelm, she feels that too. Timidity isn't charming in the way some men imagine. She doesn't interpret shyness as sweetness. She reads it as uncertainty, hesitation, a sign that you won't stand up for yourself and therefore can't stand up for her. When you avoid eye contact, avoid expressing your thoughts, or avoid showing interest, she doesn't feel flattered by your restraint. She feels burdened, as if she's expected to lead every moment. And emotional labor exhausts her. A man who lacks presence doesn't get rejected, he gets overlooked. But the opposite extreme is just as damaging. The man who overwhelms the moment with constant chatter, who fills every quiet space with unnecessary explanations and endless stories, who confuses volume with confidence, he leaves her drained. She doesn't see depth in his intensity, she sees discomfort. A man who can't sit in silence reveals insecurity, not strength. Stillness is where connection forms. When a man cannot allow quiet moments to exist, she senses chaos beneath the surface, and chaos, no matter how charming the packaging, is unattractive. Imagine this. She's sitting across from you, trying to understand the man in front of her, reading the parts of you that you don't say out loud. If your silence feels tense, she doesn't interpret it as mystery. She feels invisible, as if she's speaking into a wall. But if you spill words without pause, trying to fill every corner of the moment, she doesn't feel connected either. She feels overwhelmed, drowned in noise instead of met with presence. Both extremes push her away, not because she's hard to please, but because she's wired to sense emotional equilibrium. Women feel the subtleties that men often miss. They notice the rhythm of the conversation, the intention behind your pauses, the steadiness in your eyes. They can tell the difference between a man who's grounded and a man who's performing, compensating, or trying too hard to hide something fragile inside. What she truly wants is a centered presence, someone who listens with intention and speaks with purpose, someone who doesn't shrink into the shadows of his own life, nor inflate himself to avoid being seen clearly. Your presence becomes your anchor in those moments, the quiet signal that tells her she's safe to relax, to open, to trust. The way you balance speaking and listening determines whether she feels drawn toward you or quietly drained. And once she feels that shift, she never forgets it. Commanding the room has nothing to do with volume. It's the way you carry yourself, the ease in your breath, the confidence that requires no explanation. The men she remembers are the ones who hold their ground without forcing hers. And now, whether you realize it or not, you've walked through 7 patterns, real patterns, not abstract theories, that shape the way a woman responds to you long before she ever says a word about it. These behaviors don't just inconvenience her, they communicate everything she needs to know. They become signals she reads instantly, and by the time you feel her pulling away, she's already been protecting herself for a while. If you're honest, you've seen this before. You've felt the warmth disappear. You've watched interest fade without knowing what triggered it. But now you do. Women don't retreat because they're inconsistent. They retreat because certain behaviors tell them it's unsafe to stay connected. Every choice you make, whether silent or loud, tells her what kind of man you are, whether you're steady or reactive, intentional or fearful, choosing her consciously or clinging to her out of insecurity. These mistakes were never about perfection. They were about awareness. They reveal how attraction actually works, not as a chase, but as something maintained through character, presence, and emotional steadiness. A woman doesn't walk away from men, she walks away from patterns. Patterns that rush her, patterns that control her, patterns soaked in unresolved pasts or emotional absence, patterns that push too fast, disappear too often, or show up too small or too loud. If you want different outcomes, you don't need to become someone else. You simply need to refine the parts of you that have been running on autopilot. Build standards, strengthen your boundaries, lead your life with clarity, not panic, with respect for yourself, not fear of losing her, with confidence that isn't performed but lived. Because the truth is simple, you never actually lose a woman first. You lose yourself. And she reacts to that loss long before you notice it happening. So if this opens something in you, don't just move on. Stay, learn, grow. Subscribe to Hidden Waters so you never go blind in relationships again. Like the video if it shifted your perspective. Share it with a man who needs this wake-up call. And tell me in the comments which moment hit hardest or which mistake you're committed to leaving behind. Your evolution begins the moment you decide you're done getting in your own way.